September 7th, 1940. London. Just after 4 p.m. The sky over the East End darkened, not with weather, but with metal. More than 300 German bombers crossed the English coast in tight formation, their engines droning with mechanical certainty. Below them lay docks, warehouses, homes, targets carefully selected to break a city's spine. Within minutes, firestorms erupted along the Thames. By nightfall, London was burning. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler believed this moment would decide the war. France had fallen in 6 weeks. The Low Countries were crushed. The British Expeditionary Force had escaped at Dunkirk, but only barely. To Hitler, Britain was wounded, isolated, and rational. Rational states, he believed, always chose survival over pride. Now he would teach them fear. The bombing was not random. It was deliberate terror. Civilian districts, working-class neighborhoods, churches, hospitals, shelters. The Luftwaffe dropped high explosives first, then incendiaries, designed to ignite entire streets at once. That night, more than 430 Londoners were killed. Tens of thousands were made homeless. And it would not end. It will come again tomorrow, and the day after that. Hitler's message was clear, even if it was never formally delivered. Submit or be destroyed. Across the Channel, in the cabinet war rooms beneath Whitehall, Winston Churchill listened as reports came in. Casualties, fires, collapsed streets, entire districts erased from the map. He had been the Prime Minister for only 4 months. 4 months earlier, many in his own government doubted him. Some still did. Britain stood alone. The United States watched but did not act. The Soviet Union was bound to Germany by treaty. The Royal Air Force was exhausted. Ammunition was finite. Pilots were dying faster than they could be trained. There were voices, quiet, respectable voices, suggesting negotiation. They spoke of realism, of preserving the nation by compromise, of avoiding annihilation. Hitler assumed those voices would prevail. He did not understand Britain's Prime Minister. As fires burned through London and smoke choked the night sky, Churchill prepared to answer terror not with surrender, but with words. Words meant to harden fear into resolve and suffering into defiance. What he would say next would decide whether Britain endured or asked for terms.
To understand the weight of that moment, one must return to May 10, 1940. At dawn, German armor surged across the borders of Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. By nightfall, Neville Chamberlain was gone. Winston Churchill was summoned to Buckingham Palace and asked to form a government. He was 65 years old, widely distrusted, and remembered by many as a reckless relic of past wars. The situation he inherited was catastrophic. Within weeks, the British Army was driven into the sea at Dunkirk. Between May 26th and June 4th, 338,226 soldiers were evacuated under fire, an escape hailed as a miracle, but one that left nearly all heavy equipment behind. Britain was now defenseless on land. An invasion was not hypothetical, it was expected. Inside the War Cabinet, the pressure was relentless. Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax argued that Britain should explore peace terms through Mussolini. He believed the empire could be preserved if Britain accepted German dominance in Europe. His position was calm, reasoned, and dangerously persuasive. Several cabinet members listened. Churchill did not dismiss the argument lightly. He listened. He weighed the numbers. He understood the military reality better than anyone in the room. But he also understood something else. Any peace with Hitler would not be peace. It would be submission, followed by disarmament, followed by slow suffocation. Treaties with dictators were temporary pauses, not endings. Churchill had watched this pattern unfold for a decade. On May 28, 1940, The War Cabinet reached a breaking point. For hours, Halifax pressed his case. Churchill resisted. Finally, he rose and delivered a warning stripped of rhetoric. "If we open negotiations," he said, "we shall be finished." That same day, he addressed the full cabinet. More than 20 ministers crowded into a small room. There, he spoke without restraint. Britain, he said, would fight on. If this island were conquered, then the empire overseas would carry on the struggle. And if that failed, then our whole empire will sink into the abyss of a new dark age. The room fell silent. No vote was taken, none was needed. The decision was made. From that day forward, Britain would not negotiate. It would endure whatever came. Hitler never fully grasped how narrow that decision had been, how close Britain came to choosing survival over sovereignty. When the bombing began in earnest that summer, he believed the pressure would reopen the question. He believed fear would finish what diplomacy had failed to achieve. Churchill now had to ensure that it did not.
By August 1940, the battle moved from cabinet rooms to the sky. The German High Command called it Unternehmen Adler Angriff, Operation Eagle Attack. Its purpose was precise: destroy the Royal Air Force, gain air superiority, and clear the way for invasion. Day after day, waves of Messerschmitt fighters and Heinkel bombers crossed the Channel. Airfields in Kent and Sussex were cratered. Radar stations were targeted. Fighter Command bled pilots it could not afford to lose. Between August 8th and September 6th, the RAF lost more than 450 aircraft. Some squadrons were reduced to a handful of exhausted men. Dowding, the commander of Fighter Command, warned that collapse was possible. Hitler watched closely. If Britain could be forced to the table now, the war in the West would end without a landing. Then, on the night of August 24th, German bombers, lost, disoriented, or careless, dropped their payloads on London itself. Civilian districts were hit. It was a mistake, but it changed everything. Churchill ordered retaliation. The following night, British bombers struck Berlin. The damage was minimal. The psychological effect was not. Berliners had been told they were beyond reach. Now air raid sirens proved otherwise. Hitler was enraged. On September 4th, speaking at the Berlin Sportpalast, he abandoned restraint. His threat was public, theatrical, and unmistakable. Britain, he declared, would be bombed until it begged for mercy. Cities would be smashed. Morale would be annihilated. Resistance would be made meaningless. "Mr. Churchill," he said, "will see what will happen." 3 days later, the Blitz began. Night after night, London was pounded, then Coventry, Birmingham, Liverpool, Bristol, Plymouth. In just 8 months, over 43,000 civilians were killed. Entire neighborhoods ceased to exist. Children were evacuated by the millions. The dead were buried in mass graves when coffins ran out. The expectation in Berlin was simple. No society could endure this indefinitely. Churchill refused to allow despair to take root. He walked among the ruins, cigar in hand, refusing shelter during air raids. He visited bombed streets before the fires were out. His presence was deliberate. So were his words. On September 20th, 1940, he addressed the nation by radio. His voice was calm, deliberate, almost conversational. He did not deny the destruction. He did not promise a quick victory. He acknowledged the suffering directly. But then he reframed it. This was not punishment, he said. It was proof of enemy fear. Britain was being bombed because Britain had not yielded, and it would not. "Let us brace ourselves to our duties," he told them, "and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, 'This was their finest hour.'"
It was not bravado, it was an ultimatum to fate. Hitler had offered terror as a weapon. Churchill answered with meaning. One sought obedience through fear. The other demanded endurance through pride. Only one of those could survive the night.
October 1940. Berlin and London stood locked in a contest neither could fully control. For Hitler, the bombing had failed to deliver its promised result. British factories continued to produce. The government did not fracture. There were no peace envoys, no back channels, no requests for mediation. Instead, the Royal Air Force still rose to meet the Luftwaffe. Radar still functioned. Civil defense still held. The decision now before Hitler was stark. He could escalate further, commit resources indefinitely to the destruction of Britain, or accept that air power alone would not break the island. All the while, his attention was drifting east. The Soviet Union loomed larger with each passing week. Time, not courage, was becoming the enemy. On October 12, 1940, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The invasion of Britain would not come. The threat to destroy Britain had reached its limit. In London, Churchill understood what that postponement meant. It was not a victory, it was survival. And survival at this stage of the war was everything. On November 11th, he spoke again to the House of Commons. His language was measured, almost restrained. The enemy, he said, had failed to achieve air superiority. The terror had not succeeded. Britain remained unconquered. Privately, he was more candid. In a message to his cabinet, he acknowledged the cost. Cities lay in ruins. The death toll mounted. There was no certainty of American entry, no guarantee that the bombing would not resume with greater force. Nothing had been won, except time. But time was decisive. Every month Britain endured meant more aircraft, more pilots, more ships. It meant American opinion shifting, slowly but visibly. It meant that when Hitler eventually turned east, he would do so with an enemy still alive in the West. Contemporaries noted the transformation. Journalists wrote that the Blitz had forged a different nation, less sentimental, more severe. Diaries from ordinary citizens spoke not of hatred, but of stubbornness. They would endure because endurance had become identity. Hitler had miscalculated not Britain's strength, but its psychology. He believed nations broke the way armies did, under sufficient pressure. Churchill understood that nations also endure the way religions do, through shared belief, repeated ritual, and the refusal to surrender meaning itself. The bombing continued into the winter, but the decision had already been made on both sides. Hitler had chosen not to cross the Channel. Churchill had chosen never to ask permission to exist. That choice could not be undone. The winter of 1940 settled over Britain like ash. The bombing did not cease, but it lost its strategic purpose. What had begun as an attempt to force surrender became an act of attrition without direction. The Luftwaffe struck ports, factories, and cities deep into the night, yet the decisive moment had passed. Britain had endured the threat meant to destroy it. In January 1941, Churchill reflected privately on the months behind them. He did not describe triumph. He described survival achieved by will alone. We were very near, he admitted to close allies. Not to defeat in battle, but to exhaustion, to fracture, to the quiet temptation of compromise. That temptation had been resisted with words. When Hitler threatened annihilation, Churchill did not respond in kind. He did not promise retaliation beyond Britain's means. He did not inflate victory or minimize suffering. Instead, he framed resistance as destiny.
To surrender, he implied, would not preserve Britain, it would erase its meaning. This was the difference Hitler never understood. Hitler ruled through fear and the expectation of collapse. Churchill governed through the acceptance of pain as the price of continuity. One approach demanded submission, the other demanded participation. By the spring of 1941, the consequences became irreversible. American aid expanded under Lend-Lease. British shipyards outpaced losses. Fighter command grew stronger, not weaker. And in June, Hitler turned his armies east, opening a war he could not win because Britain was still in the fight. Contemporaries recognized the shift. Foreign diplomats wrote that Britain had crossed an invisible threshold. It could now be battered but not broken. The decision taken in May, reinforced under fire in September, had changed the structure of the war itself. The threat to destroy Britain had failed because destruction alone could not compel belief. Churchill's words did more than rally morale. They denied Hitler the psychological victory he required. Without British surrender, there would be no negotiated peace, no consolidation of empire, no final settlement in the West. The war would continue until one system of power erased the other. In that sense, the Blitz marked the end of an era. It was the last moment when a single leader believed terror from the sky could force a proud nation to kneel. After London burned and stood anyway, that illusion died. What remained was a longer, bloodier conflict, one in which endurance, not intimidation, would decide the future.